Next up, we have Rajiv Singh, who's the Managing Director of Rabobank North America Wholesale, giving us a presentation as well.
Thank you, Ivana, and it's truly a privilege and an honor to be here today. This is a continuation of a series of engagements I've had with MIT. Particularly, thank you to Professor Leinhardt, who we have collaborated with on the food side. So it's great to see that the topic today is the food-water nexus, and the linking pin is the JVOFs and the various other disciplines that are involved in all these different activities here. And it's great to see that you are trying to bring them together. I'd also like to thank Kishore. I don't know if he's here. He was one of the presenters at our food prize. He was the one who got me into this topic and connected me with Ivana, and so glad to be here. So when I initially planned my speech today, I'd done the traditional, so I'm a banker, so I'd looked at the macro, I was thinking of speaking about the macroeconomic trends, the technological trends, and then ultimately the commercial and financing aspects of that to make water technologies, more successful out there in the field. But then I looked at a number of, the lineup that you've had for the panels and all the different speakers that you have, and I said, that's not going to work. That's not going to add any value. So I changed that a bit, and after hearing Professor Matsumoto, I was thinking, this is a great time to be working in the field of water. And let me ask you, in terms of what Chandra talked about, and that we need increased efficiency of water use, of irrigation, and we need increased efficiency of agricultural productivity as well. And where the trends have been almost, if you look at it, they definitely on the second one have been negative generally. On the first one, we haven't made much progress over the last many years. So let me ask you, how many of you are fearful about whether we will have enough water to produce our food in whatever the time frame that you choose, let's say 2050? Just show of hands. Seems like a majority in the room. And so that brings to mind the Chinese proverb. It says, to do something, we have to dig the well before you're thirsty. The question is it too late now? And I think it's, I don't know. At least I don't know. I'm sure the people here in the room have a better sense of it. I don't know whether it's too late or not, but it's definitely the best time to be working on the water-food nexus. And that's because there are three forces that are coming together at this point in time, and that kind of a confluence has never happened before. One is, the three basic, of course, to work on things like water, on things like conservation, better food production and nutrition. They all require the human sense of compassion, rational thinking, and so on, so the positive values that we have. But I think there are lots of, for us to really make a change, there's a lot of these negative characteristics that we have that are also important. And those are coming together now. So those are the three that I call fear, sloth, and greed. And a confluence of fear, sloth, and greed is happening at this point in time that has never happened before, especially in the context of water. Fear we just heard about. I mean, there's clearly the kind of information that is out there about the utter inadequacy of what we can see right now of whether we will have enough water. And there are a number of reports that we can go into. There are some of the maps that Professor Matsumoto showed about where there are going to be severe water stresses going forward. Now that is available to everyone. It's not confined to a small part of the world, and it's not easy for people to migrate off from those parts of the world to go where that's not a problem. The second one is sloth. So everyone, I don't know how many of you describe yourselves as lazy. Probably difficult to admit, but I can admit that that's one of the basic human characteristics is we like to have things made easy for us. And a lot of what has happened in adjacent technologies, in things around the issue of food and water, has made it easier for a lot of what we want to do in water to succeed. And that's around data science, that's around a lot of technologies on genetics, that's in the number of engineering fields that then have the impact on what we can do on the fronts related to water and food production. But it is also in the area of financing and markets, which Chandra touched upon at the end there. A lot is happening in terms of how capital can be allocated, and the information that these sources of capital have to allocate that capital well to a lot of these initiatives that wasn't there before. So I think that the confluence of technology, data, and capital being available to some of these applications hasn't happened before. It's making it easier. It's addressing that second sort of characteristics that I called that's around sloth. And the third one is greed. Again, it's a basic human tendency. And I think what I'll talk about mostly today is that there's a lot of money to be made now in those areas that have an impact on better water production, use, and ultimately, therefore, better food production, use, and nutrition. And that, again, hasn't happened before. So while it's definitely true that we have to dig the well before we are thirsty, it's darn difficult to do that unless there's a confluence of all these different factors that are coming together. And I think they're coming together now. So I was telling before the program today that everyone who's working on a PhD in food, in topics related to water and food, this is the best time. Professor Leinhardt, I think you did it years ago. Maybe that was a bit early, but I think your students are really at the right moment in time to do their PhDs. So I hope you will make full use of this moment. I'm not going to repeat a lot of what Chandra had mentioned, especially in the food-water nexus. The fact that that agriculture, food production, is such a big user of water that's out there, and that's a very limited resource that, as we just heard, is a big factor that people are recognizing and are now working around. So that's part of the fear consciousness that is becoming even more. So almost everyone, whether you talk to school kids or sort of people shopping in a grocery store, they are generally now much more aware of this fact than they were before. And in fact, World Bank came out with a report, which I'm sure many of you must have seen very recently. It's called Uncharted Waters, and it sort of lays out very, one of the taglines is that the future is thirsty and uncertain. So it's not only the fact that we have scarcity of water looming at us, but the fact that it's going to be very uncertain. That it's not something that you can predict easily and model and prepare for. On the other hand, this is again a chart that Chandra also showed. But I think the one thing that I'd like to point out is that areas where there are going to be the most increase in food consumption, India, China, that part of the world, is exactly the area where there's going to be extremely high water stress as well. So in a way, the problem is much bigger than just the overall aggregate number show, because the areas where there is a need for that food to be consumed, there's the need for that nutrition to be made available, are the areas where there's going to be the least amount of water available. But while that's the case, you may say, where, for people here and other parts of the world where there is water, at least for now, there's water abundance, why would people care about that, given the general political environment around, there's a retreat from globalization. But that's not the case, because I think in whichever part of the world you are in, people are experiencing the effects of water stress. We've seen California. We've had a lot, nice couple of years. But every time there's a drought, if you look at it, it's increasing its intensity, and that's experienced by people. That's noticed by people, and that's something that impacts how they think about the problem globally. And I mentioned Brazil. Brazil is probably the biggest exporter of water, and is likely to be, given the amounts of freshwater resources it has and it will continue to have. But even in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, the drought that we had 2 years ago there, where their reservoir had only 5% of its capacity available, and there were water refugees out of Sao Paulo. Now you cannot in a country like Brazil, if people have that kind of experience, then you can imagine that they will take that into account as they are looking at whether it's policy formulation, whether it's whether it's thinking about agronomic practices, whether it's thinking about technology to be applied, and so on. So clearly, the fear is not confined to the areas where there's going to be the biggest impact only. It's becoming much more widespread. And then on top of that, we have the realization about in our food system that what we consume, which was never there in terms of how do we relate that to water use. And there are many, many different ways of communicating that are coming out. I'm glad that you have your keynote speaker tomorrow from the Water Footprint Network. And that's one of the things that I've always wondered. Why don't we have something like the carbon footprint, something that's easily put on a label that can tell consumers as to how much water is going into what they're eating, and kind of thing goes from 13 liters for tomatoes to about 2,400 liters for a hamburger. And then one of the most interesting ones that I saw was that for a bar of chocolate, the amount of water that goes in to produce a bar of chocolate is equivalent to 10 bathtubs of water. So these are the things that people are now becoming much more aware of, and therefore can make decisions. And the people who can make these decisions, one of the other trends that we have an enormous amount of population moving into middle class. They have purchasing decisions to make, and with this information, they are already making the right kind of purchasing decisions. But while the consumers are behaving, in a way to take this information into account, institutions and corporations are also taking this very seriously. And not only because this has social, economic, ecological impacts that Chandra also mentioned, but also it has clear business risks that people were not taking into account before. It has operational risk, reputational risk, and regulatory risk. And we've seen a lot of companies get into trouble, if they ignored aspects of water management, or or how they communicate about water, or their long-term thinking about water as well. And that's now going into corporate planning cycles, and that's having an impact on how these companies think about their stance towards water. And this whole Nexus thinking, which is a field of study itself, is helping in a way that goes beyond just thinking about one of these topics in isolation. It's forcing people to think about the interlinkages and how they can again look at not just in agriculture how do we make it more efficient in terms of water use, but it's about water use, it's about water discharge, it's about water storage, it's about how they source their water, how much energy has gone into producing that, and all of that. And I think that whole comprehensive accounting that this Nexus thinking brings is again, adding to that field of knowledge that allows people to really be concerned about it. And once they're concerned about it, because you can aggregate this and present it in an accounting format, then they are forced to do something about it. Being forced to do, now coming to sloth, being forced to do something about it, the easiest way is to then put the right price on this resource. And that's been very difficult because water is a commons, is a resource that is difficult to isolate or not make available generally to people. And that has been a biggest challenge in terms of putting the right price on water. But we have seen that even in California, where we have, it's nothing like Australia. We don't have very developed water markets, but at the time of droughts, those gray portions that you see on the graph, that's when the water markets increased and improved over time. And so this water markets work. So when there is a problem, people figure out and try to put some value on that resource that is becoming more scarce. And that is continuing to happen. So even without a lot of, so it needs, and maybe this needs a panel on its own, Ivana, what are the technical, institutional, and legal sort of requirements, prerequisites that are, that should go into creating an efficient market, and what are therefore the economic outcomes that we should be looking for. And there's a lot of work that has been done. I know Sloan's done a lot of work in this as well. Chicago's done some work on it. But it's definitely one of those areas where, to what Professor Madamoto said, not only for smallholder farmers, of course, if we put the right price on a resource like water, it's going to be the smallholder farmers who are going to be affected the most in terms of their ability to pay. But overall, stability and predictability of water water use and availability will be much better. And therefore, it's up to the institutional, legal, and the governmental support to handle some of those other unintended consequences of markets working to put the right value on water, and maybe alleviate some of the impacts that it'll have on smallholder farmers. But definitely going towards a market pricing solution is a big, is going to be a big game changer. And where it's happening, it's resulting in better allocation of resources. It's resulting in better technology application, better water management systems. The data is out there. We've seen from the Murray-Darling Basin in Australia with different parts of the world. It works. And there's no doubt about that. So I think if we can figure out a way to implement, to have markets function, to put a price on water, but then also to have institutional and public support for those who are going to be affected by the most by it and maybe need some level of support to make sure that those markets continue to get the participation that they need. That's one big area where we need to put together our heads and work on. One country that has done it very well, Israel. You had mentioned that as well. In terms of water recycling, Israel recycles 80% of its water. US does only 5%. And if you look at agriculture, even in Israel, overall, it's the same statistic. Agriculture uses about 70% of the water that is available. But if you look at the amount of fresh water that agriculture in Israel uses, it's much less. It's to the tune of, I think, 30% or so, or even less than that. So that's equivalent of saving 70% of the water that would have otherwise gone in agriculture. That can be used for other purposes. And that's the biggest, I would say, if you look at what they've done in terms of, they realize that cheap water is very costly in the long run. So they started with making sure that they put the right value on water, but then they had the right level of institutional support and technological support and, and ways to make sure that, those kinds of, that pricing is then supported by the technology and institutions that allow people to farm and use that water and not just give up. So that's a good example that I know is getting a lot of visibility out there. The governor of California has asked for Israel to support developing markets in California and other even application of technology there. That's something that I will definitely keep an eye out on. Also, in terms of technology, desalination is one of the technologies that Israel kind of committed to very early on, and at high risk. But they have made it work, and I think that has allowed a lot of other people to look at that and work and improve. There are many different flavors of that technology out there now, and the cost of desalination is coming down, and that's one of the things I would love to hear a little bit about over the next 2 days as to how that is progressing and what could be financeable and in what form, and how can we isolate technology risk from operational risk in those kinds of projects. Then the other thing that has happened in terms of making it easy is that public-private partnerships have worked. So South Asia, where it's always very difficult to have farmers adopt new technologies because they just don't have the capacity to put the upfront investment that is needed. This is an example of Jain irrigation, where IFC and Rabobank came together and helped them develop a package that was allowed that allowed farmers to adopt it in a very, very quick manner. And it's been a success. Talking about Israel, Netafim is a company from Israel. Again, in this case, the technology is so well proven that we were so comfortable that we did not need any kind of multilateral institution to support this, and we were able to design a program for them that allowed them to offer their technology to farmers in a way where the farmers are not paying anything for it up front, but it's built into an kind of a farm input financing scheme that they are generally familiar with. But coming back to the last human emotion that is driving the change that I'm so excited about, it's greed, and it's the fact that the consumer people at large, generally, both as consumers and ultimately as investors as well, have realized that they are, they have the information, that they are looking to do good, they're looking to, eat better, they're looking to make sure that they have an impact on the environment that is either less bad or even regenerative in many cases. So that has driven the supply chain down, from the consumer, from the consumer to retail to processing, all the way to the farmer, in a way that hasn't happened before. You have retailers asking for, the kind of information about water use, about carbon footprints, and so on that they were not asking before, and consumers are paying for products where there's a better representation of those practices that they admire. So I think that's been the biggest change, and that has now reflected in, I was just looking at just the last 3 months of the kinds of companies that I've met with and I've heard pitches from, the investors that I've met with and who are looking at different sectors. It's amazing. If you look at just this water-food nexus, whether it's alternative proteins, because proteins, as Chandra also mentioned, is the one area in food where it has the largest consumption of water. And there are lots of alternative protein companies that are looking at doing things in a way that does not have that kind of water footprint. Food waste, again, if you think about, you talked about, markets are not properly organized, but there's a lot of waste. You showed that very nice visual. It's amazing that when you have 70% of your water being used in an activity where the ultimate product, almost 20 to 30, and in the case of US, almost 50% is wasted. It's clear that that's one of the areas where if you want to have efficient water use, you reduce waste. And there's a lot of companies that are working now in that area, getting funding and financing. Increasing farm productivity, that's very clear that we will need to do that, whether it's 1% per annum or more. We definitely need to increase farm productivity to be able to feed the 10 billion that we need, that we expect by 2050. Lots of companies, active in that area, including companies that are looking at how do we make water use more efficient. And one in particular comes to my mind. This was about 2 years ago. I was looking at something where we needed some data on to be able to do our model. We send out our Outlook report several times every year, and usually this is done. We need 3 or 4 months of lead time because we are waiting for data from the USDA to be able to predict the different crop outputs that we use in that Outlook. We have a equilibrium model that sort of takes all of that data into account. But I met this company called Descartes Systems, which was working on remote sensing, but not only remote sensing, the combination of the information that is available through remote sensing, other sensors on the ground as well, with sort of big data, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and just the way you can have now machines see complex ecosystems. That is, from a human perspective, not possible. And especially water, the use of water in agriculture is a part of a very complex ecosystem. To be able to then work on these, use the technologies that are available at price points that are very, very affordable, whether it's remote sensing, whether it's cloud computing, whether it's machine learning. It's allowing kinds of modeling and prediction to be done about including water use. That was just not water use, water stress, predicting yields and so on. That was just not possible even 5 years ago. So that's, I think that's again going to be, it's improving every year at exponential rates, and I think that's going to allow people in this room, researchers, people who are going to work on technologies, to come up with faster cycle times to get to their, to get their ideas to the field. It's going to lead to, much better applications of some of the technologies that were, that didn't come out of the lab for long periods of time, and I'm really excited about that. The next two, adapting to new environments, so there's a lot that is happening in various flavors, like whether it's indoor farming, greenhouses, urban farming. That's because of the urbanization that is happening, and because of, again, the consumer asking for, better locally grown food. There's a lot of activity, a lot of investment going in that pillar over there. And then the last one is around genetics, so using bioengineering new food sources, including food sources that are going to use less water or are going to be able to use saline water as well. So that's, to me, it's just the number. I mean, this is just a selection of companies, the names and the logos that you see. There are many more out there. So, and this has never happened before, this kind of proliferation of activity where companies are out there, they're getting investments, they're working with products, getting products out to the market, earning revenues. This has never happened in this with this intensity before. So I definitely urge you to pay attention to this and maybe become a part of this. This movement. And I'll just have some statistics. So here, the Impossible Burger uses 95% less water, 95% less land and 74% less water. Using protein from crickets uses, compared to the same amount of protein, cows need 2,000 gallons, crickets need 1 gallon. So all of this is getting, these are very clear metrics that people can see, and it's getting a lot of attention. I won't, stay on. There are a number of, different technologies that are out there, number of different business models out there. Just if you think about indoor farming, aero farms is one. These are big, very large-scale indoor farms that have a particular way of producing produce. And then, by the way, they can produce anything. They can produce soy and corn and wheat as well, even though that will require a different, the kind of economics is definitely much better with produce right now. But if you look at just the indoor farming area, aero farms is large-scale, big. Farms on the outskirts of the cities. There are bright farms and Gotham Greens that are more rooftop within the city greenhouses. And there's freight farms, which is more distributed production of same produce and greens and so on. So there are so many different business models that are becoming possible. This is not just one. So it's not the case of investors going to one type of technologies that they feel is going to be successful, and therefore they're putting a lot of money in that and just waiting for which one is going to survive. This is not one technology. These are multiple technologies. These are multiple ways of doing business, multiple ways of earning revenues that are getting tried out there. And this is as I say, the food science is sexy again. These companies are employing so many people from food science, from engineering, from all kinds of different fields. The Aero Farms in particular has a lot of MIT graduates that have joined them. So I truly believe that if you look at this, if you follow the money, there's a lot that is going. If you look at the investments that have been made in AgTech, and if you think about the nexus to water, I would say 80 to 90% have an access to water. So if you follow the money, there's a lot of activity out there, and there's a lot, I would say, a need for attention and need for intellect to go into those areas, and I would say also a need for marketing. Yes, there's a lot of awareness that has been created. There's a lot of action that is already happening with people becoming more conscious. But I think we still need, water is still an issue that needs better marketing. So I was giving you the example of bright farms, aero farms. So when I go to, whether it's Whole Foods or any other grocery store, where I know which ones are grown, which ones are indoor farmed greens, and I buy them. If you look at the label, they will talk about everything. They will talk about the amount of freight. It has not, the fact that they haven't traveled a lot, the long distance from California that your regular produce does. They will talk about even the shelf life, because it's fresh, it's not 7, 8, 10 days old. But they don't talk about the fact that they use 95 to 80% less water. And that's because, again, there's a limited space, and they are trying to put out their marketing messages in the order that resonate with people. And so we need the issues of water to resonate a bit more with people. There's a lot more need for better marketing there. And therefore, again, I'll be curious to hear what the water footprint organization has to say about that. But in the end, I would say, yes, maybe the best time to plant a tree, to dig a well was 20 years ago. But definitely the second best time is now. And you are all living it, and I'm so grateful and happy that we have a conference like this and people who are focused on this topic. Thank you very much.